She was the kind of person who turns rules into weapons. And if I was not careful, this driveway would only be the opening shot. Years of experience had taught me something important. Some people do not come to talk. They come to win. Not moving? She scoffed, pulling out her phone. Then I am calling the cops. She dialed, turning slightly so I could hear every word. Hello. 911. There is a suspicious vehicle blocking a driveway. The driver refuses to cooperate. I feel threatened. Threatened. She emphasized the word carefully, like a card she had practiced playing many times before. I stayed silent. In my mind, familiar images surfaced. False calls. Baseless accusations. People who believe that if they speak loudly enough, the law will automatically take their side. Less than 5 minutes later, red and blue lights swept across the trees in front of my house. A patrol car pulled up. An officer stepped out. He looked at the woman first, then at me. His eyes paused for the briefest moment. Then his posture straightened. Good morning, Chief. The air froze. The woman beside me opened her mouth. The smug smile she had worn seconds earlier vanished, replaced by a blank, pale stare. The hand holding her phone trembled slightly. Chief? She stammered. What did you just say? The officer kept his professional tone. Ma'am, this is Ethan Cole, Chief of Police for Lakeview County. I opened the car door and stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes. I nodded to the officer, then turned toward the woman. She took half a step back, as if the ground beneath her had suddenly shifted. I am parked on my own property, I said slowly. There is no legally established HOA here. No rules are being violated. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but for her it must have felt like an entire minute. I saw several emotions flash through her eyes at once. Shock, anger, and finally, a cold spark of calculation. I want to speak to your supervisor, she said, forcing her voice steady. The officer answered immediately. You are standing in front of him. When the patrol car drove away, she remained frozen in her driveway. The streetlight above us buzzed faintly. Somewhere down the block, a sprinkler hissed in a steady rhythm. She looked at me again. This time, there was no explosive anger. Only a thin, icy smile. Do you think that badge makes you special? She said quietly. I know very important people. This is not over. She turned and walked away, her heels striking the concrete in sharp, precise beats, like short gunshots. I stood there for a long moment. The early breeze carried the smell of wet grass and damp soil. This house, this driveway, was where I grew up. I had always believed it would remain a quiet place to return to after long shifts. I was wrong. I went inside, set my keys on the table, and opened my laptop. A new file appeared on the screen. I typed the first line. Date, time, description, witnesses. I had no idea then how far this story would go, but my professional instinct told me one thing very clearly. That woman was not just an annoying Karen from some ridiculous HOA stories I used to read as a Reddit story for entertainment. She was the kind of person who turns rules into weapons. And if I was not careful, this driveway would only be the opening shot. She showed up at my front door just 48 hours after the 911 call. This time, there was no silk robe, no heavy perfume. Instead, she wore a carefully practiced smile and held a neatly clipped stack of papers against her chest. I am Vanessa Hartwell, she said, her voice sweet to the point of being fake. I represent the Community Coordination Committee for this neighborhood. I leaned against the doorframe, looking past her at the morning sunlight spilling over the oak trees in my yard. This neighborhood does not have an HOA, I replied. It never has. Her smile did not disappear. It only grew thinner. Not having one yet does not mean there will not be one soon. We are in the formation stage, and once the HOA is established, everyone will be required to follow community standards, including parking. She glanced toward my old SUV, as if it had personally insulted her family. In that moment, I saw exactly what she really wanted. Not rules, not order, Control. This is my home, I said slowly, and I am parking legally. Rules are rules, she replied, tilting her head slightly. Even for people who think they are above them. She turned away before I could say anything else, leaving behind the smell of freshly printed paper and a chill that crept up my spine. 3 days later, just as I had finished a night shift and was about to catch up on sleep, my phone buzzed. It was dispatch. Chief, we received a noise complaint at your address. I looked out into the yard. My electric lawnmower was still sitting quietly in the garage. I let out a long breath. Send someone out, I said, and make sure it is fully logged. A young officer stood at my gate, trying to hide an awkward smile. No violation, he said quietly. But the call has been recorded. I nodded. Another line was added to the file on my laptop that night. Then came the parking complaints. Complaints about blocking fire access. Complaints about lowering neighborhood property values. Every single one was unfounded. Every single one was documented. I began to recognize the pattern. She was not seeking justice. She was applying pressure. Vanessa started sending emails. Long emails, packed with legal-sounding language, signed Cedar Bluff Community Committee. No official seal. No legitimate signatures. But the tone read like an order. One afternoon, I caught her recording a video in front of my house. Her phone was held high, her voice loud enough for me to hear. Some people think that wearing a uniform means they can ignore community standards. I stood still. I did not react. I knew every movement I made could be turned into a weapon against me. Whispers began to spread. A few newer residents looked at me with cautious eyes, but there were others. Irene Caldwell, who had lived here since before I was born, stopped by with a warm apple pie. "Do not let her get to you," she said, resting her hand on my arm. "We know who you are." Her words warmed me against the invisible cold spreading through the street. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was mowing the lawn at 10 in the morning, well within the permitted hours. Less than 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up again. Vanessa stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes bright like she had just scored a point. "No violation," the officer said, "but the call has been logged." I shut off the mower and looked at her. In that brief moment, I saw that she was no longer pretending to be polite. There was only raw defiance left. That night, I opened the evidence file. The lines were longer now, thicker, heavier. I realized I was living inside a textbook Karen story. An HOA story without a real HOA. A Reddit story that, if I were an outsider, I might have laughed at bitterly and scrolled past. But this was my life, my home, and she had made one critical mistake by thinking I was just a man with an old car in his driveway. I was being underestimated, and I knew exactly where the real power lived. That morning, I opened my mailbox and found a certified envelope. Inside was a letter packed with dense text, demanding that I remove my fence within 30 days for allegedly encroaching on community land. I stood still on the front steps, sunlight cutting straight into my eyes. That fence had been there since before I learned how to ride a bike. My father used to repaint it every summer, and now, with a few cold-printed lines, it had been turned into a violation. Vanessa did not wait for my response. That afternoon, when I pulled into the driveway, a stranger was already standing in my yard, holding surveying equipment. His vest carried the name of a company I had never heard of. He avoided my eyes when I spoke to him. "I was hired to measure the boundary," he said. "The homeowner next door claims your fence is over the line by about 5 inches. I went inside, opened my filing cabinet, and pulled out the official survey I had commissioned when I bought the house. The county seal was still sharp, the paper still stiff. I laid it out in front of him. He compared the numbers, frowned, then let out a slow breath. "You are right," he said quietly. "I will report back." That evening, Vanessa stood on her side of the fence, watching me with a cold stare. "Do you really think paperwork is going to save you?" she asked. "The law does not side with people who go against the community." I did not respond. I simply added another line to the evidence file. Then the smaller things began. One morning, I stepped into the yard and found 3 sprinkler heads snapped clean off, as if someone had stomped on them deliberately. The soil was still soft, clear shoe prints pressed into the ground. Vanessa was on her phone in her yard. When I looked over, she shrugged. My landscaping crew must have been careless. Her landscaping crew. I had seen her nephew mowing the lawn with an old machine. No protective shoes. I crouched down and photographed every detail. Clean brakes, direct force, not an accident. I asked a deputy chief to handle the report. I did not touch it. I did not sign it. I did not direct anything. I knew every glance could be twisted. Then Vanessa went online. The first post appeared on Wednesday night. Concerned about aggressive behavior from a powerful individual in the neighborhood. No name mentioned. None was needed. Her selfie framed my house perfectly in the background. Comments poured in. Newer residents nodded in sympathy. People who had never spoken to me suddenly had opinions about who I was. Then Irene Caldwell stepped in. I have lived next to Ethan's family since he was a kid running around in ripped shorts, she wrote. Never had a problem. Maybe the problem is elsewhere. Others followed. The post disappeared in less than 1 hour. But I had already saved everything. Every word. Every name. That night, I found a thin envelope taped to my front door. Inside were photos of me in uniform, taken from different angles on different days. A handwritten note was tucked inside. Public servants should set the example. The law applies to everyone. I sat down on the front step. The concrete still held the warmth of the sun. Children's laughter drifted up from the end of the street. Everything looked normal, almost painfully so, and that was when I understood what Vanessa was doing. She was not just harassing me. She was building a narrative, a complete Karen story, where she was the victim and I was the one abusing power. I called dispatch and requested every call made to my address over the past 30 days. The report came back the next day. 11 calls, all from the same number, all unfounded. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Noise complaints, parking complaints, safety complaints, the demand letter about the fence, property damage, online defamation. A clean, connected pattern. I realized I was not just the lead character in a bitterly ironic Reddit story. I was in the middle of a real test. And in tests like this, power does not belong to the person who shouts the loudest. It belongs to the one who is willing to wait. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The house next door sat silent. But I knew Vanessa's game was only beginning, and she still had no idea who she was dealing with. I realized something was wrong on a light rainy afternoon, when my old SUV refused to start. It was not a mechanical failure, not a weak battery. Someone had deliberately loosened a small component under the hood, just enough to kill the engine without leaving obvious traces. I stood in the middle of the driveway as rain tapped against my shoulders. The chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I looked up. Across the fence, the curtain in Vanessa's house shifted slightly, just a narrow gap. But I knew. She was watching. I did not call a mechanic right away. I took photos. Every angle, every bolt, every fresh scratch. Then I closed the hood again, as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, Vanessa sent me a 3-page email. Carefully polished language. Tight arguments. She made a so-called good faith offer to buy part of my driveway to avoid future community conflict. The price she offered was insultingly low. I read the entire message. I did not reply. That evening, Irene Caldwell came by, her face tight with worry. "Did you see the new sign?" she asked. I stepped outside. A small sign had been planted right along the boundary line, printed with the words HOA, pending community guidelines. No logo, no registration number, no legal standing, but enough to scare people. "She is going too far," Irene whispered. "The new neighbors are starting to believe her." I pulled the sign out of the ground and placed it at Vanessa's front door. The next morning, she stood in her yard, voice shrill. "You have no right." I looked straight at her. "Neither do you." The escalation came faster than I expected. One Monday morning, while I was at the station, the technical unit called. Traffic camera footage near my home had been requested. The stated reason was an investigation into a resident complaint about being surveilled. The name on the request was Vanessa Hartwell. She was not just smearing me within the neighborhood anymore. She was trying to drag me into a much bigger story, one where I was the corrupt authority figure, abusing the system to spy on civilians. I felt anger rise in my throat. I swallowed it down. I insisted everything follow proper procedure. Every access logged. Every data pull traceable. That afternoon, I received another call. A man introduced himself as an attorney representing the Cedar Bluff residents group. He spoke quickly, his tone heavy with implication. My client is prepared to pursue this matter at the county level. The media is very interested. The media. The word echoed in my head like an alarm bell. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, stacks of documents rising in front of me. I thought about my years on the job, about cases where a single moment of lost control had destroyed entire careers. I understood this game well. Vanessa did not need to win legally. She only needed enough noise to make me look guilty. But she had underestimated me. The next morning, I did something she did not expect. I submitted a formal request to the county, asking for a full verification of the neighborhood's legal status. Not as a counterattack, but for clarity. The response came back quickly. Cedar Bluff was not listed in any HOA records. No registration. No approval process. No legally recognized governing body. I printed the document, stamped it, filed it in the binder. That same day, something else happened. My mailbox had been pried open. 2 days of mail were gone. Insurance bills, tax notices, things that do not cause immediate noise, but quietly disrupt a person's life. I stood in front of the bent mailbox, my hand clenched tight. In that moment, I was no longer the chief. I was a man being violated in his own home. That night, when I turned on the light in my office, I saw something new on the fence. A piece of paper taped in place. Messy handwriting. You should know when to stop. I peeled it off carefully. I did not tear it. I did not crumple it. I placed it into a plastic evidence bag, sealed it, and marked the date and time. That was when I understood. Vanessa was not looking for compromise. She was pushing everything beyond the boundary of an ordinary HOA Karen story. She was gambling, and when someone reckless believes their opponent is weaker than they are, that is usually the moment they make their biggest mistake. I closed the binder and locked it in the drawer. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was quiet again. But inside me, something had shifted. I was no longer just defending myself. This game had entered a new phase. And this time, I held the law. The message from administrative services came just as I hung my uniform on the hook. Only one short line. Chief, an ethics complaint has been filed with the county board. Your name is on the first page. I stood still, not surprised. Just a heavy feeling, like hearing a metal door close behind me. The complaint was written carefully. Polite language. Clean structure. Vanessa accused me of abusing my position, using the system to pressure a so-called vulnerable resident. She painted me as a cold, powerful man, willing to use his badge to intimidate anyone who dared push back. I read every word, did not skip a single line. Then I folded it, placed it on the desk, and took a long, steady breath. Less than 24 hours later, the local paper ran the story. Bold headline. Police chief under review after neighbor dispute. No mention of conclusions. No mention of facts. Just suspicion. And for many people, suspicion is enough. My phone would not stop vibrating. Colleagues checked in. Friends sounded cautious. Some stayed silent. I understood. In this world, not everyone is patient enough to wait for the truth. Vanessa was different. She enjoyed the moment. She posted again. This time, longer. Screenshots of the complaint attached. A call to protect the community from abuse of power. The comments ignited fast. Strangers took her side, throwing around heavy words. Karen's stories always draw a crowd eager to judge. Then, something she did not expect began to happen. Irene Caldwell wrote a long comment. She talked about my father, about winters when the whole street lost power and he knocked on every door. About me, a kid who grew up on this street and never caused trouble. She did not write in anger. She wrote from memory. Others followed. One family shared how Vanessa had called the police because their child was playing basketball too loudly. Another neighbor mentioned how she once demanded to see their renovation permits, even though there was no HOA. The pieces began to surface. Vanessa deleted the post that night, but the evidence remained. I saved everything. The next morning, I received the call summary from the past 30 days. 11 calls. The same phone number. The same address. Every single one unfounded. I stared at the report. The dry text suddenly carried weight. This was no longer about feelings. This was data. I submitted my response to the county board. No drama. No emotion. Just facts. Call logs. Officer reports. Photos from the scene. Everything organized cleanly and clearly. I did not ask for sympathy. I asked for fair review. Meanwhile, Vanessa changed tactics. She started sending me private messages. If you are willing to compromise, this can all stop. Then another. You do not want your career to end over something so small, do you? I did not reply. One evening, when I came home late, a strange car was parked halfway down the block. Lights off. Engine silent. I walked straight inside, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like cold fog. I opened the binder. The stack of papers had grown thick, and that was when I understood something clearly. Vanessa was not just trying to beat me. She was trying to provoke me. One angry word, one wrong move, one moment of lost control. I sat down, my back against the wall. In the silence, I thought about all the people who had once stood where I stood, taken down not by major mistakes, but by constant, grinding pressure. I stood up, locked the binder. For the first time since this began, I smiled. Not out of confidence, but because the path ahead had become clear. Vanessa believed she had me cornered, that I was just a man with an old car, an old house, and a name easy to smear. She did not understand that real power does not come from speaking first. It comes from waiting for the right moment. Outside, the street was still quiet. Vanessa's house glowed with light. I knew she believed she was winning, and I let her believe it. Because in confrontations like this, the most patient person is usually the one who walks away last. I knew something was wrong when my name appeared on the county board's closed meeting agenda before I ever received an official notice. Not through email, not through paperwork, but through a quiet message from a longtime secretary. Someone who had seen every power game played inside that building. You should prepare yourself, she wrote. This is no longer just about a neighbor dispute. Vanessa had found an ally, and not a small one. His name was Richard Hale, 58 years old, a county supervisor and the owner of the largest car dealership chain in the region. A man comfortable in front of cameras, behind podiums, skilled at turning minor conflicts into political leverage. He had built his public image on accountability and oversight, on reining in authority, and now, Vanessa's story was exactly what he needed. I had never met him in person before, but I saw the way he looked at me during that first meeting. It was not the look of someone seeking understanding. It was the look of someone who had already cast his opponent in a role. Vanessa sat behind him, posture straight, hands folded neatly. When Richard asked questions, she nodded at just the right moments. When he emphasized the phrase abuse of power, she let out a soft sigh, like a victim exhausted from living next to a man with a badge. I did not argue. I answered only what was asked. Short, clear, not a word extra. But even that silence was twisted. The next day, the article dropped. This time, it was no longer a neighbor dispute. The headline spoke of ethics, of authority, of a police chief under investigation. My name sat right at the top. No conclusion, no context, just suspicion. And my silence framed as avoidance. I read the article at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold in my hand. I thought of my mother, who once taught me that a reputation can be stained in a single morning, and cleaning it can take a lifetime. My phone buzzed. A young reporter. Her voice was polite, but sharp. "Do you have any comment on these allegations?" "I cannot comment on an ongoing review," I said, "but all related documents are public record. You should look at them." She was quiet for a few seconds. "There are a lot of documents," she said. "Not everyone wants me to look at all of them." That sentence stayed with me. While the media buzzed, Vanessa shifted tactics. She stopped sending threatening messages. Instead, her tone softened, almost conciliatory. "We are all tired," she wrote. "If you are willing to compromise, I will withdraw the complaint. People will forget this." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because I understood what it really meant. When someone moves from attacking to offering peace, it means they have reached their limit. At the same time, something else happened. One afternoon, Irene Caldwell knocked on my door. This time, there was no apple pie. Her face was serious. "Did you know the house next door is listed for sale?" she asked. I did not. I pulled up the listing. It was fresh. The asking price was unusually high for the market. Vanessa was not planning a quiet exit. She was trying to run before everything collapsed. Another piece clicked into place. That night, I did not go straight home. I drove past the county administrative complex, parked in a public lot, and sat there in the dark. I thought about old cases, about people who were not afraid of the law, only afraid of scrutiny, about those who use noise to hide something far uglier behind it. Vanessa had created plenty of smoke. The question was, what was she hiding? I began searching, not officially, not through any system, just public records that any citizen had the right to access. Property transactions, business registrations, small lawsuits that had been overlooked because they were scattered. The more I looked, the more familiar it felt. Different addresses, different states, but the same pattern. Buy, create conflict, build a narrative, sell, disappear. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from that cold, familiar feeling you get when you realize the truth ahead is much bigger than you expected. I closed the browser and leaned back in my seat. Outside, city lights painted the sky a dull orange. Vanessa thought she had dragged me into a political arena where I was weak. She did not realize she had just pushed me back into my own territory, a place where nothing is decided by speeches or headlines, but by evidence, patience, and timing. I realized the truth late one night, when the laptop screen cast a cold blue light across my face. It was not a major piece of evidence, just a small detail, out of place, but enough to make everything collapse like a line of dominoes. Vanessa's company did not exist. I had seen the name in emails, in her signature block, in documents she submitted to the board. It sounded impressive, polished, professional, but when I searched the county business registry, nothing came up. No license number, no registration, no tax records. I widened the search. Neighboring states, then farther out, and that was when I saw it. Not that company, but names that were almost identical. One letter changed, a different suffix, a new email address, but the same listed representative, Vanessa Hartwell. I sat there in silence. Images of everything she had done flooded my mind, creating conflict, pulling authorities into it, pushing the story into the media, then listing the house at an unusually high price. None of it was random anymore. I kept digging. Previous property records, another state, then another. Every case followed the same chilling pattern: buying homes with stated income loans, staying less than 2 years, leaving behind neighbor disputes, disappearing amid noise before anyone connected the dots. Until now. I called someone I had not spoken to in years. Yolanda Pierce, a federal agent. We had worked together on a financial fraud case once, and I still remembered how she looked at data the way others looked at a crime scene. "I need you to send me everything you have," she said after hearing my summary. "But Ethan, if you are right, this is bigger than you think." I sent every file, every log, every timeline I had built. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting in my car, parked in front of my house. "You have no idea," Yolanda said, her voice low and steady. "Vanessa is not just an entitled Karen. She is a professional con artist." She laid it out for me. Multiple states, multiple victims, the same method every time. Buying homes using fraudulent income claims, moving in, selecting a target with standing in the community, provoking conflict, recording interactions, filing complaints, framing everything as abuse of power, then selling quickly before banks took a closer look. "She prefers cops," Yolanda said. "Teachers, local officials, people whose reputations take immediate damage when accused." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Everything snapped into focus. I was not her original target. I was an unlucky variable. "We have been tracking her since a case in another state," Yolanda continued. "But we always lacked current evidence. You are different. You documented everything." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Can you keep going?" I understood what she meant. Keep documenting. Keep letting Vanessa believe she was winning. Let her grow confident enough to make mistakes. "I will," I said, without hesitation. "But everything has to be legal. No traps. No provocation." Yolanda laughed softly. "You really are a lawman." The plan came together quickly. Federal authorities would handle the financial fraud. The county would pursue harassment, false reports, and vandalism. Parallel paths. No escape for Vanessa. That evening, I stood in the driveway where everything had started. I looked across at her house. The lights were on. She was pacing while talking on the phone. She looked more tense than before, no longer like someone in control of the narrative. I opened the binder. The pages were already thick. I added a new tab. Federal Investigation. Just a title, but it felt heavy as steel. Over the next few days, I became two people. On the outside, I was a police chief under scrutiny, quiet and worn down. On the inside, I was building the tightest case file of my career. Vanessa grew more reckless. Messages, stares, small actions that crossed clear lines. And every time she did, I added another entry. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt responsibility. If she left, there would be another neighborhood, another family, another person dragged into a story they never chose. I could not allow that. That night, I stood on the porch as a light breeze moved through the trees. The city slept. Vanessa thought I had been cornered. She did not know I had just found the truth. And once the truth is exposed, it is no longer about winning or losing. It is about when justice arrives. I was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by the sound of metal scraping against wood. Not wind, not a stray animal. It was deliberate, slow, testing each weak point. I did not turn on the lights. I stood still in the darkness, listening. The scraping stopped. Then, silence. When I opened the back door a few minutes later, all that remained was a faint scratch on the latch and a screwdriver lying in the flower bed. The soil was fresh. The shoe prints were clear, small, light, fast. The next morning, I did exactly one thing. I filed a report. No embellishment, no omissions. I let someone else handle it. I stepped aside, like any ordinary resident whose home had just been breached, and I added another line to the binder. Vanessa did not wait long. That same afternoon, I received a text message from a number that looked almost identical to mine, close enough to fool nearly anyone. The message went to my roofing contractor, canceling the appointment. Reason given: homeowner unavailable. I called the contractor back. He sounded confused. "I thought you changed your mind." Not once, twice, then 3 times. The gutter crew, the HVAC technician. Each one received a cancellation from a number that was off by just 1 digit. A precise move. Quiet, but corrosive. Then the mail stopped. For 3 days straight, the mailbox was empty. No bills, no junk mail, nothing. I called the post office. The clerk said someone had picked it up, claiming to be my wife and showing identification. I had never been married. The missing mail included insurance notices and tax documents, things that do not scream immediately, but cause damage over time. That evening, I stood in the driveway holding a late penalty notice that had just been reissued. Vanessa stepped onto her porch. The light hit her face, sharpening her smile. Hard to keep up with adult responsibilities, Chief, she said quietly. I nodded, gave a small wave, then went inside. The door closed behind me. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, from restraint. I called Yolanda. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said one short sentence. She is panicking. Panicked people take risks, and risks leave traces. We adjusted the plan. No pressure, no pushing. Let Vanessa believe she was driving me to the edge. While that happened, I did something very ordinary. I installed cameras, not wireless, PoE, hardwired cables, fixed timestamps, impossible to fake, 4 angles, the driveway, the mailbox, the fence line, part of the street. The cost was modest. The value was limitless. The neighbors started paying attention. Irene stopped by, her voice low. What do you need us to do? I said only, watch. Remember. A group chat formed. 5 houses joined within an hour. Then 7. Then 10. Everyone had a story. A son accused of graffiti. A home business reported as illegal. A basketball hoop labeled a hazard. Every story shared one name. Vanessa. Meanwhile, Vanessa accelerated. New posts. Longer. Louder. She uploaded a video, claiming it showed a police car parked outside her house at midnight to intimidate her. The footage was blurry. Lighting jumped. Time jumped. A neighbor who works in tech reviewed it. 5 minutes. Edited, he said. Spliced. Timestamps do not match. The post was deleted within an hour. But copies had already spread. The following night, my car was keyed. Deep scratches carved into the side. The camera caught a hooded figure. No face. But the shoes were unmistakable. Purple. Worn in a familiar way. I did not comment. I reported it. I let the evidence speak. Amid all that chaos, Vanessa filed a request to speak at the town council meeting. Topic: police accountability. She invited the press, invited television crews, created a public event, rehearsed in front of her mirror, pacing back and forth behind the curtains, all captured incidentally by my camera. Yolanda called. This is the stage she chose. I looked at the calendar. The meeting date was circled. I understood. When someone wants the spotlight badly enough, they often forget to look around. That night, I locked the safe and placed the federal case file inside. The metallic click of the lock sounded final. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. The wind carried the smell of approaching rain. The city was quiet. Too quiet. Vanessa believed she was writing the ending to this story. That I would be forced to speak, to react, to make a mistake. She did not know the ending had already been written. All that remained was choosing the right moment to open the curtain. Vanessa sent me a message exactly 8 days before the town council meeting. Just one short sentence. You can still back out if you know what is good for you. I looked at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. My heartbeat did not rise. It slowed. Calm, to an almost frightening degree. The days leading up to the meeting passed like a tightly drawn wire. On the outside, I was still the man under investigation, quiet, worn down. On the inside, every piece was already in place. The cameras recorded without fail. The neighborhood group chat updated every unusual movement. Yolanda sent one short line every night. Watching. On track. Vanessa was the opposite. She no longer hid her restlessness. Her car left the house multiple times a day, the trunk opening and closing. Cardboard boxes were loaded, then unloaded. She was preparing to run, but she still wanted to land one final blow. 3 days before the meeting, she posted her longest message yet. It read like a speech. She wrote about fear, about living next to someone with power, about sleepless nights. The post spread quickly. Strangers flooded the comments. People on our street stayed silent. They had seen enough. That evening, Irene Caldwell came over. She did not say much. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder. "What are you wearing tomorrow?" she asked. "My dress uniform," I said. She nodded. "Good. Let them see you stand straight." The night before the meeting, my phone buzzed while I was polishing my badge. It was Yolanda. "Everything is ready," she said. "The warrant is signed. The team will move on the signal." "What signal?" I asked. "Her speech," Yolanda replied. "At the peak." I ended the call and looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked tired, but clear. No doubt, no anger, only responsibility. The next morning, the city woke up with a strange feeling. Clear skies, light wind. I drank my coffee like any other day. Everything felt almost unnervingly normal. By afternoon, reporters began gathering outside City Hall. Cameras were set up. Lights came on. Vanessa had invited them. She wanted a stage. She was going to get one. I arrived early and took a seat in the second row. I did not hide. I did not put on a show. When Vanessa walked in, she wore a dark blue suit, hair and makeup flawless. She scanned the room, caught my eye, and smiled. Confident, certain of an early victory. The chamber filled quickly. Neighbors. Unfamiliar faces. Cameras panned slowly. The murmurs stopped when the mayor struck the gavel. Vanessa was called to speak. She walked to the podium, plugged in her USB drive, and took a long breath. "I stand here today to talk about accountability," she began. Her voice carried, clear and practiced. Slide after slide appeared. Photos of me. My house. Carefully edited text. She talked about being surveilled, about police cars parked outside her home late at night, about being threatened for wanting to follow community standards. Some people nodded. Some glanced in my direction. I stayed still, hands resting on my legs, breathing steady. Her voice rose. "If a police chief can do this without consequence, then none of us are safe." That was when the back door opened. 3 people in dark jackets stepped inside. No rush, no noise. The lettering on their backs was unmistakable. They stopped in the center aisle. One of them raised a badge. Vanessa turned. In that instant, I saw everything cross her face. Confusion, recognition, fear, calculation, denial. Vanessa Hartwell, the woman at the front, said, "You are under arrest for federal financial fraud and making false statements." The room went completely silent. Vanessa spun toward me, her hand shaking as she pointed. "He set me up," she screamed. "He is abusing his power." The woman did not pause. She read the rights. Her voice was even, cold, factual. When the handcuffs closed, the sound of metal was soft. But in that room, it landed like thunder. Vanessa was led away. She turned back once more, her eyes wild. I stood. I said nothing. I just met her gaze. When the doors closed, the chamber remained silent. I walked to the podium, looked around, then into the camera. "I did not file any complaint that led to this arrest," I said. "The investigation began before this. I only provided the truth." I paused and looked toward the row where Irene was sitting. She nodded. "This community deserves protection," I continued. "And that starts with standing together." No one clapped at first. Then one person stood. Then another. then the entire room. I stepped down and returned to my seat. A strange feeling spread through my chest. Not victory, the end of a very long night, and the beginning of a peaceful morning we had waited far too long to see. The morning after the council meeting, I woke up in a house that felt strangely quiet. No cars stopping abruptly, no curtains shifting across the fence, no eyes watching from behind the glass. Vanessa's house was dark. The news spread faster than I expected. She was being held without bail due to flight risk. The federal investigation expanded across multiple states. Old names resurfaced. Former victims came forward. This was no longer a neighbor dispute. It had become a long-running fraud operation stretching back years. But what stopped me was not the headlines. It was the lightness in my chest, as if someone had finally removed an invisible suit of armor I had been wearing for months. 3 days later, the house across the fence was posted with a foreclosure notice. Loan application fraud. Contracts voided. Potential buyers disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. A week later, a new for sale sign went up. The price was much lower, more realistic. Irene Caldwell stood beside me as the new realtor showed the house. "Finally peaceful," she said, her voice soft as the breeze. I nodded, but I knew this peace had not come by accident. 2 weeks later, the county board sent an official letter of apology. They said they had followed procedure, but acknowledged the complaint had been exploited. The official who had publicly supported Vanessa quietly stepped down. No press conference, no long explanation, just a name removed from the list. That evening, the entire street gathered. No one called it a party, but there was food. There was laughter. Children ran freely across the driveway that had once been the center of every conflict. I stood at the grill, smoke mixing with the crisp autumn air. Something ordinary, something real. A neighbor stepped up and shook my hand. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving." I did not know how to respond. I just nodded, because deep down, I had considered selling the house myself, walking away from all of it. But if I had, this story would have repeated somewhere else, with someone else. That was the lesson I learned. A few months later, I used part of the settlement money to start a small fund. Not large, but enough to help people being harassed get cameras, legal advice, and guidance on documenting evidence. I did not want them to have to learn everything the hard way, like I did. I met Yolanda one last time in a quiet coffee shop. She smiled and shook her head. "You know," she said, "she got away with this much more easily with others." "I know," I replied, "but I stayed." She raised her cup. "And you stood your ground." Time passed. Life returned to its normal rhythm. I parked my car in the same spot every day, without thinking, without excessive vigilance. The cameras were still there, not out of fear, but because peace sometimes needs protection. One afternoon, I noticed a small new sign posted at the edge of the driveway. Irene and the kids were laughing nearby. The sign carried a simple message, half joke, half truth. "Park where you live." I stood there for a long time. I once thought this story was about a Karen, about a self-appointed HOA, about power and abuse. But in the end, it was about community, about not letting one person be isolated, about patience instead of reaction, documentation instead of shouting, and trusting that the truth, if held on to long enough, will speak for itself. If you are listening to this story and have faced a difficult neighbor, an unreasonable HOA, or a situation that made you feel small in your own home, remember this: you are not alone, and you are not as powerless as you think. Share your story in the comments. The wildest, most honest one might be told next. And if you want to hear more stories where justice arrives late but right on time, like, subscribe, and stay with us. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person standing firm for an entire street to rise together.